Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. Bam. All right. So, we do have round 9. A little bit late, but we do have round 9. Between Wesley So and Leinier Domínguez Pérez from the Sinquefield Cup. And as you guys know, we are still kind of juggling to see who completely wins the Grand Chess Tour. Well, actually, Wesley So won the Grand Chess Tour. Congratulations. So that part is finalized, but we are juggling to kind of see, what places everybody gets as far as the whole standings for the Sinquefield Cup. So there's still kind of some adjusting, but Wesley So did do what he needed to do to get his title and his money. So it's a nice little chunk of change he got. Malakas C. Wesley So, congrats. Good job, man. Mabuting pagbati to you. Anybody who is coming from the Philippines, my people in the Philippines, the King Makaibigan, I would say mabuhay to you. Kamusta na? Masaya kong makikinig muli. Maraming salamat po sa nanunood ng king ma video. Ingat lagi. Magandang umaga, magandang apon, magandang gabi, magandang araw. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. Anybody who is coming from Cuba or who does speak Spanish, I will say buenos dias, buenas tardes. Muchas gracias, mis amigos, para ver mi YouTube. Bienvenidos a mi YouTube y mi video. Appreciate it very much. ¿Cómo está, mis amigos? Todo bien conmigo? Muchas gracias. All right, cool. If you guys are ready to go, I've talked enough, I think. Let's take a look and see what we have for this game. So we got D4, D5, C4. Pawn takes C4. Queen's Gambit accepted on the board. So this is, not something that we normally see. But it does give white the ability to, be a little more free. Because, D5, kind of setting up certain things or trying to prevent white from getting a good center. So, as you guys, of course, know, a lot of the times there'll be like an E6 or a C6 and a knight coming to F6. So it's discouraging to move E4. What pawn takes C4 does allow white to do is grab the entire center if they want. And then, at some point, you're going to be taking back this pawn. The lack of development on the queen side for black basically makes it impossible right now to hold on to the pawn. Sometimes you'll see like the immediate B5, but that just runs into A4. And I mean, you just can't maintain things quick enough. Also, B3 is an option as well, so. Anyways, we actually don't see that in game. We see knight coming to F3. We got knight to F6. We see E3. So, Wesley So just decides to do like a little solid pawn chain situation. Because, yes, when you do push E4, you are subject to being attacked all the time. We got E6. Bishop takes C4. Sorry. We got A6. We got castles by white. And I guess, I think in a million years, you guys will not guess what is the next move that's coming up. C5. Yeah, you guys are like, you know what? I think C5 was coming. Yes. Even though the position doesn't look completely similar, to some other pawn structures and situations we might see in the past, C5 is almost always going to come. You have to break down white's center because as you guys can see, white just has like a way better center than black does. So something has to be done about it. C5, pawn takes C5. We got bishop taking C5. And this does allow white to capture on D8 with check. Moving the king over after king takes D8. Bishop comes back to E2. So, white does definitely have like a slight edge. But it's kind of similar to like a Berlin situation, like black is not like bad off because they're, like their castling privileges are pretty much revoked. You still can get some good development going on. So king comes to E7. We see knight to C3. We got B5 just gaining some space on the queen side. Knight comes down to D2. We see bishop to B7. Not only is that developing, but it's also discouraging a knight from coming to E4. We see knight to B3 knocking the bishop somewhere possibly, or knight B coming to D7 just protecting the bishop. We got knight to A5. And this is a pretty real threat, taking this knight off the board. So, you pretty much can either just retreat the bishop or develop your rook. And so Perez just decides to go ahead and just move rook A to B8. Bishop comes up to D2. So, I mean, even though black wasn't able to castle, they still have pretty much everything going for them in the position that they need. So they're still good. Everything is good. Knight comes to E4. So this is encouraging a trade of the knight. So we do. Knight takes E4. Bishop takes E4. So as you guys can see, that bishop has kind of gotten off of that square. You don't generally want to give up your bishop pair. So both sides have their bishop pair. But as you guys can see, this is a very, very open position. So neither side really wants to just give up their bishops. So this is pretty, beneficial for both sides to maintain their bishops. Rook F comes to C1, trying to attack one of the bishops. Rook H comes to C8. We see A4, pawn takes A4, and then we do see bishop taking A6, and this is the novelty of the game. It seems pretty logical. I mean, you're just taking a pawn. Like, why not, right? Rook comes to C7. We see bishop to C3. We got bishop to D6. And we do have rook takes A4. Because you're like, hey, man, let me just grab another pawn, right? Cool. We've actually reached a point in the game that if you do want to pause the video and see what move black plays in this position, go ahead and do so. Okay, cool. So I think that this move would probably stand out to quite a number of you, because I think your eye might be drawn to the fact that there are like a crazy amount of pieces stacked up on this file. That's the first thing that I think, people would be like kind of just honed in on this area. And also something else that you should notice is that if this knight develops itself somewhere, like let's say C5, you would be forking the bishop and the rook, which are actually at the moment both undefended. So if you guess knight to C5, you would be absolutely correct. This is the very, very top move. And the crazy thing about it is it requires white to make an only move. There is only one move in the position that white can make to literally hold the position. If not, they pretty much are losing the game. And Wesley So does find this. So that's why he is Malakas, right? Bishop to B4. And this causes a lot of tactics involved in the situation. And so it makes it, pretty tricky. This is a pretty tricky position. But the first thing I actually want to do is I want to go back real quick. After we saw bishop back to D6 in that position, it was actually not the best to grab this pawn here. You guys noticed that after, we got into this position, you did have an issue with the rook and the bishop both being on these squares at the same time, right? So what the computer actually wants to happen after bishop to D6 is actually going back to F1 with the bishop. Just clearing the bishop off of that square and not getting yourself in a position to be forked. And, you still have pressure on this square. You still have pressure on this square. And so it actually gives white a pretty nice advantage in this position. So this was definitely like, something that might could have occurred, but we didn't see that. Like I said, bishop came back to B4, or bishop came up to B4, which is really one of the only moves. Pretty much it was the only move in the position to hold on. So we see bishop up to D5. Now, in this particular position, after bishop to B4, you have the undefended pieces for white, right? But the problem is, you kind of have the ability to capture here, but you don't really have the ability to capture the knight. So, I mean, if you were to try to capture the rook, if you try to capture the rook, like this is exactly what would happen. So, like, knight takes A4 because you're like, hey, man, let me win the exchange, right? Unfortunately, this is actually going to drop an entire piece. The main issue of the position is that this bishop is pinned to this king. So this rook is actually on pre. So you would actually see rook taking C7 with check. The king would most likely come back to D8, and then you see bishop taking D6. And you can take on B2 with the rook, threatening a back rank mate. But, you're looking at, bishop coming back to F1. And, yeah, you have some real issues. You have some real issues. This knight, if you move this bishop, like let's say you try to do something like that, rook down, and you're trying to see if you can pin. I mean, this knight does have the ability to come to this C6 square with check, threatening all kinds of nasties, if you don't do something about it. And this is actually just completely lost for black, as you guys can see. I mean, you're just down an entire piece. And this bishop to D5 move is very, very accurate. It's actually the best move. And the main reason behind it is this knight is the only piece that's holding the bishop. So if you can get into a situation where the bishop takes here on C5, you would actually be dropping this bishop. So that was a very, legitimate move. Just making sure that, you know, any underdefended piece is taken care of. So bishop comes back to d5. We see bishop down to f1. Rook c comes to c8. So you can see pretty much both sides. They have pretty much done what they needed to do to get out of like the trickiness that was going on. So you are now in a position that you do have to capture this knight with your bishop. Bishop takes c5, rook takes c5. Rook takes c5, bishop takes c5. We got knight down to c4. Bishop takes c4, and then a very accurate rook takes c4. And so now black doesn't have the chance to grab this pawn down here because, you know, your bishop is completely hanging. So the bishop comes back to d6. Rook comes down to c2, protecting the pawn. But you have a very, very accurate move for black, and that is bishop to e5. And now there is not a way to hold this pawn because you can't push it, because here and here are both going to get taken. And there is nothing else that you can do to try to protect the pawn. So the pawn is gone. We see g3. We got rook takes b2, rook takes b2, bishop takes b2. We got h4, h6. We got bishop to d3, bishop to c3, bishop to c2, bishop to b2, bishop to d3, bishop to c3, bishop to c2, bishop to b2, bishop to d3. And I don't want to say bishop ever again in my life. I'm playing. But this was the end of the game. As you guys can see, you have equal pawns and you do have opposite color bishops. So even when you have opposite color bishops and you're either up or down a pawn, I mean, there are a lot of chances for you to draw those types of games. So that is the end of that game. And this did seal the Grand Chess Tour for Wesley So. He ended up tying for second, which it was kind of crazy watching his interview because he was like disappointed in his play. And I'm just like, all right. You're like literally like in the handful of the best players in the world and you just got second at like an international tournament. How can you be disappointed in yourself, man? I don't know. That's a perfectionist for you. I'm literally the same exact way. So I get it. So Wesley So, Malakas see Wesley So. And so congratulations to Wesley for winning the Grand Chess Tour. So this is pretty much for the last year almost. I mean, what we've been pretty much covering. So all these different Grand Chess Tour events. And they do have the U.S. Championships coming up. So I will get off here. Appreciate you guys very much. Maraming salamat. Muchas gracias, mis amigos. And I will see you guys next time.